and then we don't have any feedback coming back through the system. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to Wednesday's session on of your Network Rail Green Week. My name's Becky Bailey. I'm a principal ecologist with the Ecology Consultancy, and I've been asked to give you a bit of an introduction, a primer to green and blue infrastructure. A little bit about who I am. I've been working as an ecologist for 15 years. I particularly specialise in linear infrastructure. I've worked a lot on both road and rail. I've given up several Easter bank holiday weekends rescuing natterjack toads from the ballast at Sellafield and doing all those sorts of things that generally hold up your projects. And I'm really keen to see the ways that we can incorporate environmental impacts and environmental mitigation into schemes at a much earlier stage so that we don't end up with these situations where we're all having to give up our weekends. So I'm really interested in green and blue infrastructure, and I really want to talk to you and hopefully get you as enthused as I am about that through today's presentation. So I work for a company called the Ecology Consultancy. It, in theory, is a great name for Google to find us if you want an ecological consultancy. And we're part of a group of 4 sister companies, including Temple, who focus on the environment, planning, sustainability, ourselves, the Green Infrastructure Company, who really focus on this stuff as their day-to-day business, and Arbico, who focus on arboriculture and trees and land management. We really focus on providing impartial and tailored advice to our clients. We like to work on long-term big projects with you guys, building trust and relationships, and therefore really understanding what your needs are, what your project needs are, and really pushing through that. We are on your framework for environment and consents for both the southeast and the eastern areas, and we're really able to help you across the entire GRIP life cycle of a scheme from start to end with collaboration and consultations, environmental and social appraisals, environmental impact assessments. You say it in the environmental side of things, we can pretty much do it, and we're absolutely willing to help you. So give one of us a call if you're in those areas. We're absolutely willing to help. I'm just going to ask again that people, as you're joining, can you just make sure that you're joined on mute? I'm hearing a couple of people moving around in the background, so that would be super if we could just all make sure that we're muted. So what I'm going to cover today is what green and blue infrastructure really is and why it matters, and then what benefits that it can bring to Network Rail as a whole, specifically focusing on your sustainable development principles. So how it can help you actually hit your targets as an organisation and drive yourself forward. So what is green and blue infrastructure? When most people think of green and blue infrastructure, they probably think of green roofs or green walls like this one at Birmingham New Street Station. And they're great, but they're not the whole picture. Green and blue infrastructure does include natural places such as parks, woodlands and rivers, and also man-made aspects of the environment, canals, water treatment facilities, green roofs and green bridges and things like that as well. It's all of these things together. But it has to be said that green infrastructure is not simply an alternative description for conventional open space. The real kicker for it is that it's a network of multifunctional green and blue spaces and features that deliver environmental and quality of life benefits for communities. And that's the ultimate key point, and that's where I actually find the concept really exciting, is in that it's multifunctional and it's not just focusing on one thing. You might be expecting to hear me talk a lot about biodiversity today. I'm not going to, because it's that multifunctional aspect that crosses over everything and every aspect of life and our environment that makes it so important. So where does green and blue infrastructure fit within the scope of biodiversity as a whole? And A lot of these concepts you'll have heard a bit about in the last 2 days, and I know that you've got talks on biodiversity, net gain, and ecosystem services and natural capital coming up. So those talks tomorrow and on Friday will delve into this in a lot more detail. But I think it's important that we sort of talk about how green and blue infrastructure can support these ideals. So, as we touched on the definition in the previous slide, green and blue infrastructure involves creating and managing habitats to support natural processes. It should be aligned with and support and enhance those processes. Now, if we look at the top of the triangle here, ecosystem services are basically the benefits that are derived from those natural processes. And then when we're trying to look at how we quantify those benefits, it's very difficult to come up with ways of necessarily quantifying some of the benefits that we gain from the natural world. You know, we know that all of these things, from pollination and food supplies, all take part in it, but how do we quantify that? And that's where natural capital comes in. And natural capital is that framework for recognising and valuing the natural processes so that their importance to the economy and society is recognised and can be quantified and brought into basically your spreadsheet at the end of the day. You know, where do they fit? What benefits? Can we actually put a number on this? And natural capital enables the benefits of green and blue infrastructure and ecosystem services to be quantified and therefore assessed during your decision-making process. And that's what is able to allow us to actually take forward green and blue infrastructure and actually incorporate them into your KPIs or your sustainable development principles and see how it can fit and help you achieve your targets as a whole. I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of information going to be coming at you. We will make sure all of these slides come out to you, so please don't frantically try and write down all of these. We'll make sure you get all the information. So why is green and blue infrastructure really important in our schemes? So as we've touched on, the definition of green and blue infrastructure states that it must be multifunctional, and therefore it can be integrated to anything to provide benefits. And these benefits are really wide-ranging. They can be health and well-being. They can provide improvements to quality of life and community engagement. They can be biodiversity. They can provide additional habitat spaces. They can provide green corridors to move through the environment as a whole. They can also provide landscape improvements, such as improving the quality of place. They can reduce the impacts of flood events and things like that. They can also be really important for economic growth. Nice places can increase land values, and therefore, you know, there can be monetary realizations through this. And there's also huge gains to be made in climate change through heat amelioration and air quality and noise improvements that can really change the way that people live. This slide and this photo is taken from the Kunshan Cultural Plaza in China. And China has a number of cities, and they're known as sponge cities, which is a great name for what they are. And they're areas that have real problems with flooding due to the monsoon rains. And the entire city's urban area has been designed with permeable surfaces and these green and blue infrastructure areas that slows down, absorbs and treats the water and the stormwater, and then provides clean, dry and safe roads and urban areas for people to be in. It cleans the water, so there's really good water quality in the area. And they're really functional, attractive spaces for people to spend time in. And that's sort of an idea of the multifunctional aspects that green and blue infrastructure can bring to you. Carrying on with that surface water management example that we touched on with the sponge cities, this slide shows how there is an entire range through grey and green infrastructure that can be accessed, and really it's a case of using items across that spectrum to provide the best possible outcomes. Taking a little bit and combining them, we can improve function and resilience. Green and blue infrastructure, though, it's not about small scale installations, and it shouldn't just be those little bits at the end to close out problems that might be outstanding. We really want to centre green and blue infrastructure on a large landscape level, and that's really where it can show the best possible options for multifunctional approaches, interlinked, and really responding to the local need through any number of interventions, all layered on top of each other and providing real benefits to everyone. And these landscape scale interventions are things that Network Rail, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs. We're already doing it as part of the HS2 Green Corridor. We're maximising those opportunities through the design and maintenance of green and blue features across the wider landscape. We're not just looking within that small area where you're actually going to build a railway. We're looking wide out at all the stakeholders, all the communities that could be impacted by this, and trying to actually drive value through these changes that are made at a wider area. We are past the days where it was a simple like-for-like replacement strategy that we were making and everything would be contained within the one area. Blue and green infrastructure as a whole provides a mechanism by which multiple ecosystem services can be provided through that careful planning and looking at the big picture. This slide is obviously showing that as a case study on HS2. HS2 is engaged with groups and communities and are trying to deliver projects from heritage enhancements, water enhancements, and ecological enhancements to try and drive that green and blue infrastructure and enhance it to provide a big green corridor beyond the railway. And these measures go above and beyond what's really expected for a project and are reported as impacts. So as I touched on and how I want to talk to you about green and blue infrastructure and what it can really do for you guys at Network Rail is by talking about your sustainable development strategy. And I'm not going to go into it in any great detail. I would hope that those of you who need to know everything about it know everything about it. And those that maybe don't, if you know, maybe just go away and read about it if you're even interested in that sort of thing. But it's something that underpins the way that you work and identifies your priorities for sustainable and responsible business performance. And you've got a lot of targets that are in that and a lot of commitments which are admirable, and they cover a wide spectrum. That includes your environmental responsibilities, which is something that's obviously very much in my wheelhouse, how you manage natural resources and how you manage your waste. It also covers your social responsibility, how you engage with the communities by you, how good a neighbour you are to the people that you work with, and how well you treat your staff, how well you treat the people that use the network. And you also have environmental and socio-economic responsibilities, such as reducing energy and carbon usage and looking forward at how you build resilience for the climate crisis, and how also you can support Britain's wider economic development. And all of those boil down to some, as I say, some aims that you have. And green and blue infrastructure really can support you on that. It can help solve problems within the network. And because as we've talked about, it's the multifunctionality of green and blue infrastructure that can provide huge cost savings through your designs. You're using one solution potentially to solve many, many problems. This picture here is an example of some bank improvements to help stability now and erosion control. Now, we can incorporate blue infrastructure into that at the top to divert water away so it's not running down and undermining the slope. We can also, with this mesh here, it's also going to reduce the potential for badgers to be able to dig into your soil and therefore cause potential digging under the lines and any instability that might be caused there. If you've considered the way that you're going to plant it, as opposed to it just recolonising naturally with the soil that's put on it, if you go for some really dense grassland planting, which can be designed for invertebrate benefits, you could also make sure that it's that dense that buddleia doesn't have a chance to to establish itself there, and therefore you're reducing the cost and management of that and the health and safety implications of people having to go onto the area to actually eradicate it. Another example of this multifunctionality idea is a study that was done as part of HS2 onto barn owls and how we could reduce animal strikes, which is obviously a health and safety concern in some areas as well, but also has a huge impact on populations as we drive new railways through areas. And this looked at how landscape design and mitigation areas could help funnel barn owls into a different area and reduce those areas. So it's not only these areas of planting are helping with air quality and also stopping noise aspects onto people who are living adjacent to the railway, they're also providing additional biodiversity benefits for those barn owls as well. So these small interventions help deal with those localized issues, but they can have a massive collective impact across the network. And those large-scale projects can really meet large-scale issues. So one of your main targets that we drew out of the Sustainable Development Principles is that you have a commitment to improving performance on adverse weather days. Now, green and blue infrastructure can provide resilience to that. We've touched on it already, and these interventions can either be a point of impact or source of impact. Sustainable drainage, which can include swales and rain gardens and even green roofs and blue roofs, which are a new thing as well, storing water. They can store that rainwater locally and reduce the flood risk. At the risk of stealing a term that we've heard quite a lot recently, we're flattening the curve of the speed that the water actually reaches your tracks and causes the impact. So by holding it further back and slowing down the speed that it comes at you, you're stretching out the time that you have to deal with it and therefore lessening that impact. Another major issue, moving away from water, which I'm aware that we've used quite a lot as examples, are overly hot days, and these are going to become more and more regular. We're already seeing it as part of the climate crisis, and hot days are a problem for offices, for people in train stations themselves, and for your heat sensitive installations. And green roofs can provide really good cooling through evapotranspiration, and even single trees have been shown to provide cooling through shading. So there was a study done in 2007 that suggested that by increasing the current area of green infrastructure in Manchester by only 10%, it would result in a cooling across the area by 2.5 degrees under the high emission scenarios. And that's huge when you're dealing with the potential for more days to be extremely hot. Another of the areas that you have targets on are about delivering social value to local communities. This is your being a good neighbour target, really. And this is a photograph or an artistic rendering of what's about to be built. And it's the Cowsung Metropolitan Area Railway Station. And it's currently under construction. It's due to be completed in 2025. And it's an absolutely phenomenal looking green space that has been designed with little pockets of planting for biodiversity and areas that the community and the users of the railway station can actually get out onto, and the people who live in the area. It's providing an additional park whilst the train station is combined within. And green space is good for people. It is just a thing. It sounds very trite, I know that, but it's scientifically proven across many different studies. Living closer to parks and recreational leisure facilities is statistically associated with increased physical activity. And that physical activity within green environments provides better psychological and physiological returns than exercising in grey spaces. So it actually makes it better for you providing these areas. And the more often a person visits urban green spaces, the less often they experience stress-related illnesses. So by providing that on your doorstep, providing that in your workspaces can be huge for people's mental and physical health. So therefore, you really do have to think about providing green and blue infrastructure as part of your spaces as a key element of good design for public and work environments. And it's huge as part of your key issues for communities and other stakeholders to show that you're thinking about the wider picture here and how you can provide additional benefits for the people that are walking through your areas every day, for the people that are working in your areas every day. Some of the more hardline targets that you have are based around your reduction of carbon emissions and your energy use. And they are quite challenging, and they're quite exciting for me to see that they're so challenging. You've got a lot of land. Network Rail owns a lot of land. You've got about 30,000 hectares all told of it. And that could be a huge place for reducing the atmospheric concentration of carbon by locking it up through your earthworks, through your soil, through the plants that you use on these. And all of these take carbon dioxide from the air and hold it in the plants. And you'll hopefully be aware of why that's a massive issue with the deforestation of the rainforest and the like, and that's where a lot of carbon storage has gone from. So redressing that balance is very important. Now, trees can lock up about 7 kilograms of carbon per square metre, and that will take about 25 kilos of carbon dioxide out of the air per year. Grass is a bit less, it's about 5.5 kilos per square metre, and that takes about 20 kilos of carbon dioxide. So whilst you think of trees as being really powerful at this, grass is a massive driver as well. And to put that into effect, that means you'd only need 40 square metres to offset a flight from London to Barcelona, which isn't a huge amount when you think about the amount of land that you have. So green infrastructure can provide lots of opportunities for additional planting as well. We don't have to look at the flat layer of your space because we can build up as well and have planting going upwards with green walls and the like, and then even on top. So that can provide a substantial contribution to climate change adaptation through that carbon storage. And whilst it kind of feels like it might be limited, it is a really important contribution towards that climate change mitigation. These natural interventions, that you can do whilst addressing other issues are increasingly being recognised as really desirable win-win approaches to combating climate change, because you're also providing all the social and economic benefits that we've already touched upon. So it's that multifunctionality again, where we're actually providing one thing, but instead of taking with the other hand, we're giving with it as well. Reduction of energy usage, and if we go back to your monetary baseline again, the costs of heating, central heating and air conditioning are massive for any business, ensuring that spaces, office spaces, workspaces are suitable for people to be in. And urban areas and parks and tree-lined streets, as we've touched on, contributes massively to reducing an area's overall demand and the moderation of what's known as the urban heat island effect. And we touched on that with that example about Manchester's green infrastructure earlier. So trees and green roofs and green infrastructure features can cool urban areas hugely. There is the shading effect, which means that the sun isn't beating down. They can also deflect that radiation from the sun directly. But they also release moisture into the air, which as it evaporates has a cooling effect. And that can have a huge monetary saving by having to not have your air conditioning running on all the time, bearing in mind that buildings are responsible for about 40% of energy consumption and 36% of carbon dioxide emissions in the EU. There's a lot of power being used just to keep buildings adequately suitable. So all of this energy that's being used to maintain your internal building temperatures through heating in winter and cooling in summer can be reduced by the use of green infrastructure elements such as green roofs and green walls. because they can act as insulation for when it's colder, but they can also reduce that temperature as well when it's hotter through shade and water evaporation, as we've covered. So there are huge gains, potentially as much as 45% annual energy consumption with the simple installation of a green roof. And that's just on the monetary baseline. As we've touched on, they're multifunctional, they have other benefits. Now, this is probably where the vast majority of people who've called into this were expecting me to spend a lot of my time, and I'm really not, because you're going to be hearing a lot about this over the next few days, and I've heard a bit about it already. And it's how green and blue infrastructure really does underpin what we're doing for biodiversity. Railways support approximately 1,600 different plant species. All 12 native reptile and amphibian species have been recorded within your soft estate. And there are hundreds of species of birds that have been recorded through the area. And you pass through many protected habitats and species and sites, including SSSIs, all of these really important areas that you don't want to damage and you want to actually support where possible. And green infrastructure and building this into your projects can really help biodiversity in these three main ways, as touched on by the slide. You can increase the functional habitat area. And this might seem daft, but there's a lot of things that we consider to be common sense that have never actually been proven by science. So there's lots of people working out and doing these things. But there was a specific study done in 2006 which looked at urban green areas, and it focused specifically on areas of railway embankments, derelict and brownfield sites and parks. And as I said, it's probably common sense, but the larger the areas, the larger the amount of species that were recorded, not just in number, but the array of species was more. And that was particularly important for plants and invertebrates. And as we've touched on, pollinators are massively important to human society. So this is a huge thing. By linking up small areas and increasing that footprint, you have massive gains on the area of species, the number of species and the area that they're able to work in. You can also increase the population sizes of some protected species. That can be done by providing additional support and resources for them to use, and again by increasing the functional habitat areas. But if we think about an example of a bridge, and a standard grey bridge and then a green bridge, for instance, we could provide additional nesting opportunities for birds such as swift. We could build in some bee boxes and some bat bricks and the like, and provide additional spaces for those really important species. We could plant trees, we could have a green wall, we could have climbers going up it. And all of these provide additional opportunities for species in that area that wouldn't have been there with a standard grey bridge. And finally, we can enable species movement through the area. And this is the concept of these green corridors. It's providing stepping stones for species to move into areas they maybe didn't have access to before or were maybe cut off for. It allows an increase in genetic diversity. It keeps fractured populations and brings them back together. So railways can be a huge green corridor linking opportunities and wider areas and moving some of those really restricted species into wider opportunities that they might not have had. It's absolutely vital that railway land delivers these benefits to assist wildlife in general, because it provides that adaptation to changing climate and provides additional suitable habitats that are being lost in wider areas, and allows the railways to act as corridors and refuges and allows migration through. Biodiversity net gain is coming, and you're going to hear a lot about this tomorrow, and it is a good thing, and it's not a thing to be scared of. It's what we've been doing previously. It's mitigation and things. It's just a way of quantifying it, and it measures the value of habitats ranging in scale from individual trees and green roofs and green walls through to those important priority habitats. And I think it's massively key for everybody to understand that green and blue infrastructure is valued alongside those natural areas and those natural places. And that's why it's going to be hugely important, so that you can realise biodiversity net gain through your schemes, to view these two items on a level playing field. We can actually green the grey that's there, and it can be held up on the same level as some of these natural places. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a primer to where we're at with our thinking on green and blue infrastructure. And I really want to just really press again the importance of viewing it not as a green and blue infrastructure, not as a stopgap at the end of your project to try and close out those pesky little environmental problems that are outstanding, but by bringing environmental and ecology people to the table at design stage, we can help really take the solutions that you want to implement and use them to solve a wider range of problems that you might have through your projects at a really early stage, to hit all of those potential areas that you really want to strive towards, to make Network Rail a really forward-thinking and an organisation that's truly actually focused on making Britain a better place. Thank you very much for listening to me. I've got a couple of colleagues on the line as well. I've got Sarah Cox and John as well, I think, is on. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to take them now, or you can send them to my email address, which is on the slide.
Hi, Becky. This is Emmanuel.
Hi, Emmanuel. How are you?
I'm great. I mean, thank you so much for your, very inspiring presentation on what I hope will inspire others to integrate those green infrastructure solution into what we do. I can hear a bit of echo. I'm just gonna maybe stop my presentation thingy. Here we go. Hopefully it'll get better. A question is around, so being at a design organization, we have kind of great opportunity to integrate those solutions early, but sometimes what we face is either the kind of novelty or maybe worries from our client in terms of maintenance of these solutions, because it's kind of new and they like maybe the old ways. How would you go at trying to kind of maybe convince and change this perception of those solutions?
I think that you're right. There are a lot of concerns, and a lot of it does boil down to cost at the days. And a lot of these things, I suppose, have been perceived as not really necessarily providing the benefits that they originally did. But that's really historical now. There's a lot of work being done on this, and those weight issues and things with bridges, which has often been something that's been brought back to us, saying, the bridge can't actually support it, are really not the case anymore. Out in Spain, they have green roofs that are actually on the buses themselves, moving through the city. There's a line that goes from the city centre out to the local nature reserve, and every single bus that does that has a green roof on top. It weighs next to nothing now. So these things really can be integrated without actually causing issues from a design side. And on the cost side, as we've said, because they provide multifunctional benefits, the money that would be spent on dealing with something in heritage and dealing with something in ecology and dealing with something in the water quality aspects can all be combined together, and it's them. If you buy in bulk, you get it cheaper. Did that hopefully answer your question, Emmanuel?
Yes, and I was talking to myself because I was muted, but not for long. What I was saying, can't remember now. Yes, I think it's exactly what you said. Breaking those barriers and challenging the status quo. I mean, we had an example very recently where we kind of brought up the idea of a green roof on a station, and it was kind of immediately pushed back by the maintainer, thinking, oh, I can't take it, it's too complicated, the roof is not structurally sound to accept it, etc. So it's also using all that information you presented today, and obviously Temple and the Ecology Consultancy and the other DSF suppliers support to help us making the case of those solutions to our clients, so that they maybe see better the benefit, or they are presented in a more kind of robust way, so that we can offer them, rather than scoping them out straight away, because we know the client won't be willing to see that change. In terms of yeah, I'm sure you know where I'm coming from.
You have, there is a green roof that's for you. They can be light, they can be low maintenance, they can focus on various things. There are as many different green roofs as there are situations for one to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good. I mean, it's probably one of the things to bring back with us after this presentation. There is a solution for all the kind of situations. And just very briefly, where do you think maybe the main opportunities, the kind of no-brainers might lie in a kind of railway environment? I mean, we've shown some of the embankments and potentially stations. What do you think from experience, and maybe things you've seen?
I think for certainly your wide-ranging multifunctional aspect, the land that you have within, and this is probably not where you're expecting me to go, the land that you have within your train stations is often underutilized when it comes to green infrastructure. And as we touched on, green infrastructure can have huge impacts on people's mental health. And I think we all know that people get very stressed out whilst commuting by rail. So by taking in some of these potential areas that you could improve, you can make huge differences to people who use your network and the people who work in those areas, as well as actually benefiting the sort of biodiversity in those areas from, even as simple as a green wall around the entrance as you're arriving. I mean, it makes people smile, and it's great for the bees.
No, that's great. I mean, we do get involved into kind of stations refurbishment and things like that, and sometimes we go for the same old, or the kind of not trying to challenge things. So I think that's a good example. And bridges, maybe something you mentioned as well, which is quite interesting. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I was thinking maybe sustainable drainage around maybe things that we tend to pipe away, so that it becomes a problem to some others. But also
Indeed.
should create some good opportunities.
As someone who lives in the sort of Yorkshire area, I saw a lot of problems with the floodwater over this winter, causing problems. And where you have wider areas on your soft estate, you can use that to slow down the water and sink it away, and try and sort of reduce the speed at which it's coming at you throughout the area. And that would obviously have huge impacts on how you're able to run the network.
That's great, thank you. I'll open it up to the rest of the team, if they don't feel shy today, as they did the previous 2 days.
I think we do have somebody with their hand up. I just don't know how to do
No,
it.
it's me, Becky. My name's David Exeter. Thank you very much.
Hi there, David.
I was just interested in your experience of green walls,
Yes.
how successful they are long term. Particularly in this climate, and when you say, in Yorkshire you get incredible floods which have an impact, and yet down south it's arid. They seem like a good idea, but how successful are they in terms of longevity?
And that is a question that does get raised, and it is a concern, because a lot of historical ones have dried out. They do require a lot of water because it moves through it. But that again goes back to having that integrated process. If you're collecting water on the roof and slowly feeding it down through a rain garden, you can feed everything as it comes through drip irrigation style. Much like with the green roofs, not every green wall has to be the same. It doesn't have to be planted the same. In areas where you have much less rainfall, we can use much more drought tolerant plants on there that also provide the biodiversity benefits, as opposed to areas where we've got you know, a lot of water and we want a lot of roots to try and take that up and move it through the plant. So it's one of those ones where if you look at it and you know what your restrictions are going to be, we can tailor things and build it into the wider area to make sure that it actually is going to be able to be kept there with the bare minimum of maintenance.
Thank you. I think maintenance is an issue for Network Rail, isn't it? It's one of those, anything with major maintenance probably is not going to happen. That's the problem. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, as I say, you know, a lot of these can be combined with capturing rainwater and things, and then it's just a case of keeping it clipped back if it overgoes. But you can have much smaller plants that don't grow to that size. So it's tailoring the area that you've got to work with.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? No, well, thank you very much for listening to me talk about green and blue infrastructure. It is a little bit of a passion project for me in re-greening the grey. So thank you, and I hope that you maybe do just look at your next little job slightly differently and see if there's any potential opportunities out there that we can realise. So thank you very much for everyone calling in, and enjoy the rest of your Green Week. I'm sure you've got 2 excellent talks to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Thanks, Becky. Well done.
Thank you.